the nail right on the head, Tuckers. My kind of man. I love the All-American. He's bloody putting a bloody machine gun, mounting it onto his car. He's
pretty happy with everything that I manage. We've had a few tech issues, which I'm going to blame you for. Is that fair enough? Can I blame you for that at the moment? Welcome back, everyone. We are here for episode 3 of the Throwing Shade podcast. Amazing boy that we haven't killed each other yet, and we've made it back for episode 3. Aaron Ball here, guys, my co-host. Everyone's come to know Aaron really well. How you feeling, boy, that we're here at episode 3? How you going today?
Yeah, we've made it, Tuckers. Obviously, we've had a few ups and downs, and but it's been very fun, and how amazing to finally get a guest. Like, I was wondering when we're going to get one, and we've managed to get a great one, so I'm pretty pumped.
Absolutely, which we're going to talk about that in a minute and introduce who our guest is shortly. But look, I think we put some content out yesterday on our social media just to thank our subscribers and our audience so far. It's been a huge start for us over the past month. We're over 30 days into the show now, 130 odd subscribers to YouTube, which are all organic listeners, which is really amazing for us. Instagram is going really well. We're getting a lot of views across all our channels. So hats off to our audience and our friends and our families and our new fans that are listening to us. Thanks for joining in so far. As Bally just touched on, we've been doing a lot of work. We wanted to do 2 episodes originally, just to find our feet, just to establish a bit of chemistry, Bally. Some would say we haven't found that yet, but we've got a couple of hours under our belt now of episodes, which is great, but we needed to get into the real stuff, and we needed to find ourselves a guest, and we put a lot of work and a lot of time and effort into trying to identify who the right type of guest might be for us. Incredibly honoured to announce that a couple of days ago we sat down with a pioneer of not only combat sports in Australia, but if you look at his career, a pioneer of sport in Australia in general. We had Elvis Sinosic join us on the Throwing Shade podcast a few days ago. Elvis, for those of you who don't know him, is Australia's first ever UFC fighter. So in the early 2000s, Elvis represented Australia as our first competitor within the UFC. He was our first ever Australian to take on a title challenge, which means he fought for the belts. Our episode goes into a lot of detail about his journey to the UFC, goes into a lot of detail about his title fight, and beyond that, here we also spoke about a lot of other cool stuff, some stories about Joe Rogan, Dana White, Bruce Buffer. It's all there. It's a great episode. He was very generous with his time. He spent nearly 2 hours with little old Aaron and I, 2 little plotters that are keen on UFC, and we've had Australia's first ever UFC fighter on the show. So Elvis, thank you once again. You're a legend. We know you're going to be a great friend of our show. We will get you back on. Product has come out really good, Bolly. I'm pretty happy with how the audio was, pretty happy with everything that I managed. We've had a few tech issues, which I'm going to blame you for. Is that fair enough? Can I blame you for that at the moment?
Yeah, I'll take that shade, Tuckers. I had a bit of a mare. I think we'll probably all come to know that technology and me don't go hand in hand. Might have cost us probably one of the best interviews of all time.
No, but look, Elvis, I know you'll be watching this, but we have managed to salvage the interview. We've got a fair bit of footage, and we've got nearly 2 hours of amazing audio that Elvis was, the time that he spent with us went for nearly 2 hours. So we are going to do some shorter versions of the interview, but on this podcast that you'll find on YouTube and on Spotify, you will find the full interview. But there'll be shorter versions coming out, where we break it down into the different topics that we spoke about. Yeah, some really cool stories, guys. You're going to get a real look at the behind-the-scenes actions of the UFC. Yeah, you're going to hear a bit about the way that Dana White operates. You're going to hear a bit about Joe Rogan and Elvis's relationship with Joe Rogan. What else, Bally? Some really cool stories about weight cutting, some really cool stories about the likes of Tito Ortiz, Chuck Liddell. We go through it all, don't we?
Yeah, well, he was, like you said, so generous with his time. We went through, the pay dispute. Should fighters be getting more with this new Paramount deal? We discussed, it was a bit about his career, his ups, his downs. Like you said, Rogan, all these different relationships that he made throughout the UFC. And, obviously some of my favourite was talking to him about Tito Ortiz and, how everyone thinks he's this crazy guy, where in actual fact, as he mentioned, he's a bit of a teddy bear backstage, and he's quite a good bloke. So it was great just to understand what it took to become Australia's first UFC fighter. And he had some great stories. So I'm sure everyone will absolutely love it.
Fantastic, Bully. I agree. And look, we are going to get into the interview shortly. So for our listeners, it's not long, but we do have a couple of agenda items just to touch on quickly because the UFC rarely stops. We rarely have a weekend off. A couple of weekends ago, we had Mario Batista taking on Oliveira, which was a really good fight night event. And from my perspective, we saw a really good finish in Mario Batista. But further to that, we've got a pretty exciting fight night, which is coming up this Sunday for us, which I think is in Houston in America, and it's headlined by Sean Strickland. A lot of the sort of casual fans of the UFC out there would know who Sean Strickland is, but he's taking on and fighting Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, who is a really well-rounded opponent, coming off an 8-fight win streak, different styles. For those of you who don't know much about the UFC, Sean Strickland is very much a stand-up fighter, very good boxer, very good jab. He has been the champion. A lot of people would know him for being the person that dethroned Israel Adesanya in Australia, in Sydney, a couple of years ago. Had the performance of his lifetime, held the belt, went into a great rival with Dricus du Plessis after that. Had 2 fights against Dricus and couldn't come away with it. A lot of people thought that he won that first fight against Dricus. In between there, he had a good win against Paulo Costa as well. So, look, he's been fighting at the top of the ranks, Strickland. There's no doubt he's been fighting the best of the best for the last few years. But Anthony Fluffy Hernandez is a bit more of an up-and-comer, different stylistic matchup. Fluffy's a grappler. I think we've got the odds. What are we coming in at? I know that Strickland is the outsider at $3.34, and we've got Fluffy at $1.33. Bally, give me the rundown. How do you see this fight playing out? Give me the insights for the matchup.
Yeah, Tuckers, I think you touched on it perfectly. I think Strickland's stand-up game, he's got that great jab. He's going to put the pressure on. I think Fluffy Hernandez can't let him get set. He can't just give him time. He's going to have to pounce on him and really just put that pressure on. I think it's all going to come down to if Fluffy Hernandez can actually get him to the ground and really make it really hard for him. I don't know if Strickland's wrestling is going to be good enough to be able to deal with it. I also think that he's got huge tank. He's got massive endurance. So I think that really could play into his hands. But in saying that, I just think that, like we saw with Justin Gaethje, there's levels to this game. Like you said, the 2 people that Strickland's lost to was DDP, who's one of the best and could be a Hall of Famer, and then Alex Pereira, who's obviously done what he's done. So I think there is levels. I'm going to back Strickland. I think he's going to just keep it on his feet. I think he's going to work that jab, and I think he's going to win by points. I think it's going to be an absolutely grueling fight, and I'm pumped for it, mate.
Yeah, and look, I think Sean is he's a character, right? Like, he brings eyeballs. First time he's fought in America for a few years now. We know that he's fought in Australia twice. He's fought in Canada. He's a polarizing character, Bully. We know he's got some pretty strong opinions. What do you think of Sean the man? Are you a fan? Do you like the all-American nature of the man? Like, I know if you follow him on socials, you'll see him out there bloody shooting and hunting, riding motorbikes. Seems like your type of guy, Bully. I reckon someone you'd really roll in those type of circles if you lived in the States. What do you reckon of the man, Sean himself?
You've hit the nail right on the head, Tuggers. My kind of man. I love the All-American. He's bloody putting a bloody machine gun, mounting it onto his car. He's, he's a wild unit. He does say some things I don't 100% agree with, but I think he's great for the sport. He's a massive personality. I also love how he just gives it to other fighters and he calls people out. He doesn't just kind of sit there and be quiet. He challenges the norms, and I love him as a person and think he's hilarious. I found it funny when he was crying when he was getting in the press conference. He's obviously he's got some demons, Big Strickland. But I do love just the sheer arrogance and classic American of we're the best and you're the worst. So I love him.
And what do you think is? Let's just stay with Sean for the minute. What do you think is next for Sean if he does win this fight? I think like we touched on, he's been really at the top of the division for a while, hasn't really wanted to drop down to the lower rankings, and we all wanted to see him fight Rob Whittaker, I think, for a period. We all think that that's a great fight, but he does have history with comes out as well, right, the champ. So they've gone back and forth for years. They really dislike each other. Again, it's another stylistic, really tough match for Sean, but is he in that realm for a title shot? I mean, you've got Imavov who's up there. Fluffy is obviously in line for a shot if he wins as well. But what do you do? Do you put him straight back? Do you put him in contention for another title shot?
Yeah, well, I think you've exactly what you've said there. I think the UFC would love all the tension between him and Khamzat. Like they're fighting all the time. He's bagging his religion, where Khamzat is obviously doing the same. Calling him an American pig, and that I just think the drama will be incredible. Imagine the press conference, all the lead up to it. I don't think it's a great fight because I think the champ is just going to destroy him. He'll take him down within a second. I don't think Strickland's got enough takedown defense to be anywhere near the champ. So I think it will be a one-sided fight, probably worse than we've seen, because I don't think the big boy Strickland's moving around that well these days and put on a few kegs. So, yeah, I think it'll be one-sided, but boy, is it going to be fun if that happens. Otherwise, yeah, you're right. If Fluffy gets through, I still think I don't think anyone can beat him, to be honest. I think Fluffy, he could have a crack at him, but I just don't think anyone's going to come near him.
Yeah, well, it's funny. There was footage I just saw before that Strickland, he was actually saying that he reckons Fluffy's a better grappler than Khamzat and a better wrestler as well. So that would be an interesting matchup. But look, it's a bit of a holding pattern at the moment in the UFC, Bally, where we're in that stage where I don't think there's any actual other title fights that are currently booked. You've got the BMF title fight, which is coming up in March, but nothing else is actually concrete and locked in. But there's no shortage of news going on in terms of potential matchups. We're here in the White House card is not far away, and we spoke a little bit about whether we should really dissect the White House card today, but we are going to leave that because we want to wait till some news is out there. But I did see, and this is something that's of interest for you, I know, we saw Perth might be announced in a couple months. You had some interesting thoughts on it. We might be getting an awesome matchup in Jack Della Maddalena and Carlos Prates, one of the fighting nerds. What do you think? Is that an exciting matchup? Does that tickle the fancy and getting over there, Bally, for you? And do you give Jack a shot? Like, what do you think of that matchup if it comes off?
Yeah, I think it's an incredible match. I think it's not a great match for JDM because I think Prates is a serious talent. And after his previous loss where he just kind of got manhandled, I'd hate to see him lose 2 in a row. You do forget, though, that JDM is a big man. I think he could use his size and maybe manhandle Prates, but I don't love the fight for him. I think it's a super fun fight and everyone will love it. And you're right, I've got a little rubber arm ball over here. So if that gets announced, there's a big chance that me and you, Tuckers, will be on the first flight to Perth, and we'll give it a fair shake and hopefully, get the press passes and get to the weigh-in and really give our followers something to listen to.
Fantastic, Bally. Well, look, I think that probably takes us to the pinnacle at the moment in terms of what's going on in the UFC world. As we touched on, this interview that we've got, we need to get to a Bally because we know that it goes for nearly, hour and a half. So for the real rusted-on MMA fans, those of you out there who really love your UFC, there's going to be plenty in there for you. But it's a great interview for those people who just want to understand a little bit more about the characters behind the sport, learn a little bit about the backroom door dealings that happen. Some controversial takes around weight cuts and how to avoid getting your real weight on the scales he touches on. So look, I think we better throw to it. Is there anything else you want to just touch on about the King of Rock and Rumble before we throw to Elvis?
Well, I guess the fact that, he would have been perfect for the fighting nerd stable. He calls himself, the toughest nerd that's ever fought in the UFC. He's got a background in computers, so I found that really interesting. This guy's 6'3", quite a daunting figure. But to find that kind of softer side was really interesting. And I just loved hearing all the stories and the tips and tricks on, what he did with the weight cuts, how much he got paid, even he gave us insights into, there was no YouTube, there was no text, things back then, or the way they actually received footage and, different genres of martial arts would get sent to him via tape, and it was just very interesting. And I absolutely loved it, Tuckers, and I think everyone will really enjoy it.
Well, without further ado, we are going to throw to the first guest ever of the Throwing Shade podcast, the king of rock and rumble, Australia's pioneer of the UFC, our first ever Australian UFC fighter. Enjoy the interview with Elvis.
Let's begin with the challenger standing to my left. He is a jiu-jitsu expert, an Australian Vale Judo Open champion, and a Pan-Pacific Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion. Standing 6 feet 3 inches tall, weighing in at 200 pounds, fighting out of Sydney, Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the King of Rock and Rumble, Elvis Sinosic.
Good to be the king.
Legend.
Great work, Elvis.
Love it. Perfect, Elvis. That's a perfect introduction. And look, I do just want to quickly ask the question. You touched on it at the start. I noticed on a few of your interviews, you introduce yourself as the king. Can you give us the background of that story and where the nickname comes from?
Well, look, I know a lot of fighters like to give themselves a nickname, but the reality is you don't give yourself a nickname. It's the fans and the people and that give you that name, and when they give it to you, you keep it. You don't. I always thought it was funny when people go and try and make their own nicknames, and because they want to be tough. And mine's fairly obvious. Elvis, the king of rock and roll. On my first event, I think it was one of the reporters in one of the articles coined me the king of rock and rumble, and it's pretty much always stuck ever since. And then I'm sure you've seen the finger point. And I'll give you that story as well, how that came about.
Elvis, can you just take us back? You touched a little bit on the journey prior to getting into the UFC, but can you touch on where did it start? How did the love for combat sports, filter itself into your life? Can you tell us a little bit about the journey of rising through the ranks within Australia, what the scene was like, I guess, back in the 90s when you were really coming through the ranks in the Australian scene? And I guess, how did you find yourself competing in the UFC? And we're going to touch on what your UFC run looked like, but how did you get yourself to the UFC? And I guess, what was the landscape like at the time?
Well, this is going to be a long one. So, for people in my era would probably be aware of Bruce Lee. So, as a young kid, I was a big Bruce Lee fan, used to watch all the Bruce Lee movies, and that's kind of what started my journey into the martial arts. My first martial art actually was judo, so I started doing judo as a young kid. It was pretty much I wanted to do kung fu because that's what Bruce Lee did, but the only martial arts classes locally at the time were at my primary school, which was judo classes. So, I started judo, did that for a few years. Then once I got a bit older and got a driver's license and could actually choose my own training places, I was looking for, again, kung fu, but I couldn't find anything locally, and I found an ad for a taekwondo school, which was Korean kung fu. We know that's not the case, but it got me into the striking side of things. So I did taekwondo for quite a few years, got my black belt into that. And now during this time, I was reading, a lot of martial arts magazines. Most people probably don't read many magazines today. I guess it's what you would call the paper version of the internet. So Australasian Fighting Arts, Blitz magazine with John Will. And, through that, I discovered the Gracies through John Will's journey, traveled to Brazil, started training with the Gracies, went to the US, ended up meeting the Machados and, his journey. But once I discovered that, I was really intrigued by what they were doing. It kind of inspired me a little bit. I can be a little bit obsessive compulsive. So when I kind of set my mind to something, I kind of go all in. I start something and it either clicks, and so I'm all in, or it just falls off into the background and disappears. But the martial arts kind of stuck with me. So I started looking for a jiu-jitsu school, and there was no places in Canberra where I was born. So I started training in a a Bruce Lee Jun Fan school, which was a combination, a little bit of grappling, a bit of striking, a bit of stick work, a bit of knife work, which kept me kind of occupied until I got the opportunity to move to Sydney. I ended up moving to Sydney, finding Anthony Lange, who was my first jiu-jitsu coach, who was under John Will. So I started training jiu-jitsu back in, I think it was end of 95, start of 96. And then once I kind of discovered that in the magazines, we started reading about the UFC. So I kind of set a goal for myself where I wanted to jump in to the cage. Now, for me, at the point where I decided I wanted to do this, it was never about a career. I'd done security work a little bit. I'd had scuffles and fights at school, but nothing really serious. And I kind of wanted to use the experience to test both myself and my skills. So I wanted to see, how would I handle the pressure? Would I fold when someone's trying to beat me up? Because people react differently to that sort of violence. So it was a personal test, but then I also wanted to know whether the skills I were learning actually worked and I could apply them under a stressful situation. So, I petitioned to jump into the first, at the time it was called the Australian UFC, and until they got sued and had to rename it to Cage Combat 1, but that was the first event back in 97. I think I was the equivalent of like a 4-stripe white belt. But I was really keen to kind of jump in and have a go. And it's kind of funny because the sport was so small, how many links to the future are in there. Like my first match was against a guy called Mac Rocker. He was from Canada. My first ever pro event out of Australia would end up being in Canada. But sitting in his corner, I remember this photo, I wish I could find it, is it's a photo of me knocking out Matt Rocker from ground and pound, and back in the corner hanging off the cage was Frank Shamrock, who was one of his coaches. And then, as you're aware, later on he would actually end up being one of my opponents. So that kind of launched my career. As I said, initially it was a personal test, but the thrill of being in there just was amazing. The rush was incredible. I still remember, I'm getting tingles talking about it. I still remember walking out to the cage the very first time. And obviously I was the Aussie. The crowd was going crazy, was cheering for me, chanting my name, and it was just amazing. And then I remember walking into the cage, walking across and seeing my opponent on the other side. And the really telling moment that let me know that I had the potential to do well in this sport was I heard the clang of the gate shut. And as soon as the gate shut, my world just went shunk. I literally, everything disappeared. I couldn't hear it. All the noise disappeared. The ref, the only thing sitting in front of me, the only thing that I was focused on was my opponent across the cage. And then, once that bell rang, history begins, and I became a pioneer just out of being at the right place at the right time. I was never supposed to be in the event. I ended up getting in because some of the competitors that were supposed to be in the event got injured and they pulled out and they found difficulty. They had people who were interested in competing, and then once they started cross-training and doing some grappling, realized how out of their depth they were, and a few of them pulled out. And I'd been calling the promoter ever since I put my application every single day. Hey, is there any opportunity? And like at first he was like, no, you just, I didn't have a name. I hadn't won any major events. I didn't have a lot of international or even national recognition, definitely not outside the sport of jiu-jitsu. It was still very early days. And then eventually goes, we've had a pull-out. We'll put you in the eliminator for the reserve. So I got put into that, and then 2 weeks before the event, someone got injured. They offered it to Neil Bodycott. He turned it down. He wanted to stay in the reserve because he felt it was a better opportunity to jump into the event. If someone gets injured, pull out. So I put my hand up, said, yeah, absolutely. I haven't been calling you every day not to miss this opportunity. So I got given the opportunity. And then, funnily enough, the day before the event, Zane Fraser was jogging down Bondi Beach, popped his Achilles tendons, and Neil Bodycott ended up jumping in there. So again, he was one of the pioneers, and I'm sure many may not be aware, but he ended up passing away a few years later. But yeah, it was an absolutely amazing experience. Now, this part is going to take a lot of explanation because back in the day, the internet didn't exist to the same degree it did now. There was no YouTube, no Rumble, Facebook, X, Instagram, none of that existed. There was no way to get any content. So the only way we could actually find out what was going on is tape trading. So what that meant is you would have a video of, say, an event or an instructional, and you would reach out to someone overseas and go, hey, I've got this, what have you got? I'll swap you mine for yours. And eventually you would make connections around the world, tape trade, you would get events from all over the world, the Russian Absolute, some of the Brazilian events, obviously, Shudo, Pancras, rings that were happening at the time. So I kind of built up my knowledge of the sport, and that's kind of where I kind of discovered leg locks through a Sambo video, and I realized that they were largely ignored in jiu-jitsu and MMA, and I felt that could be an advantage that I could take into the sport. So that's why I started with the leg lock game. But also the only way to communicate was through like bulletin boards and email lists. So I was on a email list called the Combat List. So what it was is you would email to a generic email address. Everyone would email to that, and then replies would come out to everybody's email. And so you would get back, you would, it's not real time though. Like there would be like delays of anywhere from, 5 minutes to 5 hours when people replied. But the biggest problem is the majority of the people were in the US. So, at first I was coming into work and I would have these hundreds of emails, and I'm like, oh, this is too much. So I got what's called the digest version. So what would happen is I would get all the emails in a single file. I would go through them and then reply to any of the ones that I actually wanted to talk about. And it was through that list that I met the promoters of which would eventually be TKO. I'm trying to remember the event name. But, I met them, and they were in Canada. They were going to look to get me in. They would become the organization that would eventually launch GSP's career. I also met this guy, Joe Silva, who was working with John Peretti, who was with the UFC. He was his assistant. So I kind of made contacts through there trying to get fights overseas. There was a lot of interest initially, but at the time, there was not much money in the sport. It cost a lot of money to fly someone from Australia to an event. So I even met Bas Rutten at one point. He came to Australia, through Larry Papadopoulos, through Pancras. He saw me at one of those sports jiu-jitsu events, and he goes, yeah, you've definitely got potential. And so he contacted a promoter he knew in Holland. They contacted me to try and get me to fly out and compete at one of their events, but then they saw how expensive it was, so that fell through. So that kind of went on for a couple of years. So, I had my original fight. I ended up fighting in rings shortly after in 98, and then it was nearly over 2 years before anything else eventuated. And that's one of the reasons I kind of stopped leg locks, because all I could do in Australia was jiu-jitsu or shoot jiu-jitsu, where heel hooks and the like were not permitted. So I'm learning all these skills that I can't use. So I kind of stopped doing them and focused more on the fundamental jiu-jitsu that I could use at jiu-jitsu comps, and that would also benefit me in the future in MMA. So I'm here, nothing going on for years, and then out of the blue, in 2000, I get this email from the combat list. Hey, are you interested in fighting on our event? And I'm like, yeah, look, I'd really like to fight at light heavyweight. I'm not a big guy. And they're like, oh, we've got too many light heavyweights. We need some heavyweights. Would you be willing to be a heavyweight? And I'm like, I'll do whatever I have to. My first event, I fought someone that was on 120 kilos. So I'm like, you know what? I think skill can overcome size and strength if the skill disparity is in your favor, which I felt it was at the time. So I wasn't supposed to fight at their first event. I was supposed to fight in their second event, because their first event they were going to have a heavyweight title fight, and then the next event was going to be a tournament-style eliminator where 4 heavyweights would go in, and then the winner would end up fighting whoever the champion was. And then about 10 days before the event, the heavyweight, Stefan, I can't remember his name, he's a French guy, had a car accident, ended up with a broken neck, had to have his spine fused. And they're like, well, do you want to jump in for the heavyweight title fight? And at the time I was, 90 kilos soaking wet, and I had to be over 215 pounds. So I ended up going, yeah, I'll take it. And I was supposed to fight Chemo Leopoldo. So, and he's the one that had that massive fight with Royce Gracie in the UFC. So I'm like, yeah, this is going to be awesome. And then on the flight over, he ended up pulling out and not turning up. So they had to find another opponent, and they're like, look, your opponent has pulled out. We've got trying to find some alternates. Will you fight? What was his name? He's super heavyweight. Sorry, I'm just having a blank on the name. Big guy, but he was like he's like 300 pounds. And I'm like, look, I was going to fight him on the second Australian cage combat. I'm more than happy to fight someone that big. But fighting someone of that size and skill, because he was a very, Tom Erickson, that's it. Tom Erickson was an absolute beast at the time. Of that size, I go, it's going to take time. I've got to, prepare properly for someone of that stature. I would prefer if you could get someone closer to my weight. And so they went, yeah, no problems. They went Dan Severn. I'm like, he's 280. I'm like, at least get someone that's closer to the 250. I'm going to be coming in at, I told them 215, but I'm like, I'm going to be coming at 215, and they went, all right, we found someone else. And the funny thing is, they told me he was 240. I'm like, yeah, beautiful, no problem. The funny thing is, he told them he was 250. And so he turns up after weigh-in. I had to wear ankle weights to make the 250. So I wore tracksuit pants and I put ankle weights on and weights in my pocket so they wouldn't know that I was under 215.
Wow.
So I pretty much walked in 215 on the thing, and I'm expecting him to walk in at around 240, 245. He gets on the scales 265. And I went to the promoters and I'm like, you told me he was 240. And they're like, oh yeah, he told us he was 250. Because they thought if they fudged the numbers and then he fudged and it's 265, and they're like, are you still going to fight? And I'm like, I've weighed in, of course I am. I'm not a pussy. But that's not what I signed up for. But it's done as done. I'm not going to pull out now. I've flown across the world. It's a heavyweight title fight. He was a local. Long story short, I kind of got screwed over in the event because I ended up kicking his leg so much till his knee dislocated. They stopped the event to let him recover, and then they let him continue the event. So I should have had the UCC Universal Combat Challenge first heavyweight title, but it ended up going to a draw at the end because there was no winner, and that kind of launched my international career. And then after that, I had Javier Mendez, who was Frank Shamrock's manager at the time, reach out and goes, hey, would you be interested in fighting Frank Shamrock in K1 in Japan? I'm like, yeah, I'll take it. He goes, oh, look, we're not offering the fight now. We're just looking at potential opponents. We want to find a big name, Japanese opponent, because it is in Japan and in K1. But if we're not able to get it through, would you be willing to jump in? I'm like, yeah, sure. And then obviously, a month or two goes by. Because this was, I had the fight in November of 2000, and then the match was supposed to be in December. And then after about, 6 weeks, I hadn't heard anything. I'm like, oh, I'm not getting the fight. And then, again, 2 weeks before the fight, I get the phone call. So, oh, look, we had some big name Pancras and Rings fighters that we wanted to fight, but they pulled out at the last second because their promotion didn't want to promote another promotion inside Japan. So I got the fight. So again, short notice, fly over to Japan to fight Frank Shamrock. And funnily enough, the only footage he'd seen of me was in my Rings match, which I ended up losing after about 10 minutes. It was like a 30-minute match. It was obviously old Rings rules. It wasn't at work. It was a real match. There was no punching to the head standing, just open hand strikes. No ground and pound. You could ground and pound, but only to the body, obviously not to the head. And then obviously all submissions were legal. I think I pulled off the first Guga Plata, which I called a shin choke back in the day. In the event, he escaped through a rope escape. He ended up heel hooking me. After that, I escaped with a rope escape, but I tweaked my knee. And at the time, I didn't realize that my leg didn't feel right. And I actually ended up switching to southpaw because I couldn't kick with my right leg, so I was kicking with my left. And Frank watched that, and he thought I was a southpaw. So that kind of gave me a bit of an advantage going into that fight because I was orthodox.
Yeah.
The match ended up going the full 5 rounds. I ended up losing a decision. It was a good match for myself. I felt I did really well. I pushed Frank. The funny thing is, I think around at the start of the 4th round, I was gassing hard. Like 2 weeks' notice, I really wasn't prepared for it. And I told my coach, I go, I don't know if I've got the energy to finish 2 more rounds. He goes, yes, you are. Shut up, get in there. And I went, okay. So I shut up, went in there, ended up finishing the fight. I had a couple of good exchanges. I actually swept Frank, had him mounted at one point, tried to heel hook him, nearly knee barred him. He ended up escaping that. I made a big mistake where I had him mounted and he baited me into a triangle and I took it, reversed it. He ended up escaping the triangle because it was a bait. Almost stomped me on the head because stomps were allowed back then, but thankfully didn't. Finished the match. And because I'm more of a fan than I am a fighter, before the fight, every time I saw Frank, I'd go, hi, I love your work. I've watched you in the UFC. You're awesome. This is a real honor to be able to be facing you. And he's just like, wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't have a bar of me. And I'm here bubbling around, just excited to be here. And I spoke to him after the event and he goes, oh, look, I'm really sorry when I'm fighting. I can't like my opponent. I've got to be, not hate, but I can't know them. I've got to, because I'm going to beat them up and I've got to have that mentality that you're a bad person. And he's like, it was really cool afterwards. But one of the funniest things he told me was that he goes, look, if you ever get the opportunity to fight Jeremy Horn in the UFC, don't do it. And I'm like, that's strange. You fought him. Why? He goes, because Jeremy's one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC. He has some of the best skills in the UFC. And he's the sort of fighter that if you lose to, people will forget about you because he's not highly regarded. But if you beat him, it's not going to be a huge victory because people don't recognize just how good he is. He'd gone to decision with Nogueira, was dominating Frank before he got submitted, had a great fight with Anderson Silva. So his skills were, on another level. And by the way, he was also one of the opponents that I accepted for the UCC, which he ended up turning down. So obviously I had these 2 fights, finally getting some international recognition, international experience. And then in 2001, again, 2 weeks notice, I get a call up this time from Joe Silva, who had gone from being John Peretti's assistant to being the matchmaker because Zuffa had come in and bought the UFC off SEG and taken over, and they promoted him because, they didn't find John Peretti suitable. He became the matchmaker. He contacted me. The funny thing is I get this phone call, I think it was at 4:00 in the morning. Early days of mobile phones, I pull my little flip Motorola up. Hi, who's this? Joe Silva. Joe who? Joe Silva, UFC. And I'm like, oh, hey, Joe. Goes, oh, look, we need an opponent for Tito Ortiz, for Jeremy Horn, because his opponent has pulled out. Are you able to fly to the US in 2 weeks? I'm like, yeah, sure. Just send me an email. I hung up, went to sleep. I woke up the next morning going, man, I had the craziest dream. I called one of my friends. I had this dream that the UFC called me up, wants me to fight. I'm like, man, that was so real. I've gone into work, jumped on my email. There's an email from Joe Silva. Hey, we just need to get your details so we can organize flights. And I'm like, oh, holy crap. So I've called up my coach and gone, hey, coach, you know how we've always wanted to get to the UFC? Well, it's happening. I've got 2 weeks notice. For those who aren't aware, Jeremy was supposed to fight this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt called Cafe Dante. I wasn't able to make the event, and that's how I kind of got the opportunity. So that was how I got into the UFC. As I said, it was a long story that got me there, but it was that fight with Jeremy Horn through that journey of discovering the sport through tape trading, mailing lists, meeting other people in the sport, and I guess that's where it really kind of kicked off from there. And again, sorry for the long story.
No, that's an awesome story, Elvis, and it was a great insight. And geez, I particularly just love the passion coming through your voice when you spoke about the first time you got in that cage. That's just, that's really cool insight, mate. And look, I was going to ask you about Jeremy Horn and what that feeling was like of actually getting into the cage for the first time within the UFC. And I was really curious at the time, like, this is a massive occasion, right? Like, you've got an Australian who is competing in the UFC for the first time, going up against, some would say not a massive name in Jeremy Horn, but very experienced guy, very well regarded in the US. Were you getting any media attention? Was anyone giving you any love, like, once you were actually going into that fight? I know it was only a couple of weeks' notice, but were you getting any love in Australia from the media?
Look, as far as the UFC was as far as the Australian media was concerned, the UFC didn't exist. I didn't even get a byline in any of the newspapers or anything. Obviously, after the event, the Australian magazines talked about it, but it was such short notice. There was nothing in Australian media. Which brings up another funny story. Thankfully, the CTE hasn't knocked these out of me. So I mentioned the tape trading. One of the other things we used to get was a newspaper called Full Contact Fighter. So again, as I said, it's the internet on paper, but we would always get it like a couple of weeks or a month after a show. So we would always be reading them retrospectively. So you would see you would have coaches and fighters put in predictions for the upcoming event and this sort of stuff. But the event had already happened, so it was always interesting reading it in hindsight. Well, when I got to New Jersey, I actually got to read a Full Contact Fighter before an event. And what do you know? I was in there. So they were talking about the main event with Tito and Evan Tanner, and all the fighters and coaches had unanimously said that Tito was going to win. Now, because I was the co-main event, because this match for Jeremy was to give him a shot at Tito. So by this point, he'd started getting recognition. He'd nearly beaten Frank. I think he'd choked out Chuck Liddell. I mentioned some of his other history. So finally, he's getting the recognition. He's now becoming a bigger name in the sport. So he was supposed to win this match, and then he would get the shot at Tito. And I knew going in that I was being thrown into the lion's den, that, obviously I could win, but they weren't expecting it because they were looking to promote Jeremy versus Tito, because that's what everyone had been talking about for a while. So when I got in there, I read the predictions, and the same thing happened. Every single pundit basically said that Jeremy was going to win. He was going to win by submission within 3 minutes. So I set my goal, my personal goal, of submitting Jeremy in under 3 minutes. So obviously I went into the fight, no pressure. Everyone expected me to lose. I was just loving the crowd, the atmosphere, just finally being where I'd always wanted to be, in the UFC cage. So the match goes on. Obviously, I ended up catching him in a triangle armbar, which later gets called the Dead Orchard. And I have another story about that. Remind me to bring that one up later. So the triangle armbar at 2 minutes, 59 seconds. So I got to put mud on the face of all those who predicted how I would lose. So, it was just an amazing experience. I'm in the cage, I'm getting the tingles again, and I'm standing there with the referee holding my hand, Jeremy on the other side, and I'm waiting because they're doing the announcements, they're going through, Bruce doing his thing, and I'm standing there waiting for my hand to be raised, and I look down, and there's this cameraman at my feet shooting up at me, and I've just looked down at the cameraman, looked straight in the camera, kissed my finger, and pointed straight down the camera. That's great. So that's where the kind of finger point came to. The reason it ended up sticking is because after that event, the UFC took that little bit of footage and they created these little highlight clips of, people walking into the cage, standing across from each other, then, the big slams to the feel the pain music and the knockouts, and then people's hands getting raised. And the very last part of the video montage was the finger kiss, and ended up going on the video game as well, ended up going on their ads on the pay-per-view. So, yeah, the finger point ended up becoming my call sign from there.
Amazing. And look, it didn't get much. I mean, I was thinking about, you're looking at your record and everything like that, Elvis. It doesn't probably tell, if you purely look at the record, the true story of your career within the UFC, because you did go in and get thrust into the very top echelon of fighters, right? Like, you just talked to us about Jeremy Horn, but it wasn't too long after that before you're in a title fight against Tito Ortiz. Most of our listeners would know who Tito is, one of the biggest personalities and names the sport has produced. Tell us how you got the call up for Tito. Tell us what the build up was like, and if you've got any memories of the actual fight, can you give us a bit of a rundown of what that was like?
Look, again, I'm full of these stories. So, interestingly enough, after the event, me and my coach sat down. We watched Tito dismantle Evan Tanner, and we had a chat, and I said, look, Tito's a big ask. We really need to plot a good path to earning our way up to there. I think we need to get more experience in the UFC, look for some fighters, because, we've just taken on the number one contender, but we need to get some more experience, so we need to find some more suitable opponents, so we can work our way up, not just to deserve the title shot, but to be prepared, to get, because, at this point I'm still only like 4 matches in MMA, and, Jeremy had, I think now he's had something like 200 matches, but back then I think he was climbing up towards, well past 50, somewhere between 50 and 100 matches. So he had a ton of experience, had fought the best guys in the world, Nogueira, Anderson Silva, Frank Shamrock, Chuck Liddell. that was a big jump. So I was kind of hoping for a step backwards. So we kind of agreed on that, and then ended up, flying back to Australia. And then, 2 weeks later, 4 a.m. phone call, and Joe's like, "Hey, Elvis, we can't find anyone that wants to that's able to take on Tito Ortiz. We're finding it difficult. You beat the number one contender. Will you take the fight?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, send me an email." This time when I woke up in the morning, I'm like, "All right, I'm going to check my emails. I don't think this is a dream." Yep, as I thought, they had offered me the fight. So I ended up calling my coach and I'm going, "Hey, Anthony, you know how we talked about taking it slowly and finding suitable opponents for me to earn that title shot towards Tito?" And he's like, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, they've offered me a suitable opponent." And he's like, "Who?" And I go, "Tito." He's like, "That's a big jump." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but the opportunity to fight for a world title is not something I want to turn down. So, we've got 2 months. We've got more time to kind of prepare for it. So I've accepted the fight." And he goes, "Okay, no problems. Let's go." So that's kind of how the fight happened. And then, getting to New Jersey again. So this one was in the Shadowlands, the Meadowlands, which was right on the border of New York. They wanted to be in New York, but they couldn't. Obviously, later on, we would see them successfully go into New York with some very big names. But back then, they were in New Jersey, which is bordering New York. So they put it in the Meadowlands in an arena which was close to one of the entrance exits to New York to try and capture a lot of the New York market. We actually did our press conference in New York there. And again, I've gone in with my same bubbly, friendly personality. And me and Tito got on really well, house on fire. Like he was actually pretty cool behind the scenes, easygoing, wasn't a dick about it. And I think when he did his T-shirt thing, he ended up having a T-shirt. I can't remember what it was, but it was far more respectful than a lot of the others because we got on so well. And I remember we're doing. So this wasn't at the event. This was so I fought at UFC 30 against Jeremy. UFC 32 was I was supposed to fight Tito, but it was UFC 31 that they flew me in for an in-cage appearance so they could announce the fight. And that UFC 31 is where they shot a lot of the video footage and to be used at UFC 32. And I remember me and Tito were doing some face-offs. We were doing the nose-to-nose, mean, angry face face-offs. And I just remember me and Tito trying to make the other one laugh during this face-off to see who can make the other one laugh first, which was funny. I think he went to tickle my private bits, and I said, "If you do that, you better be willing to follow through." So I got a laugh out of that. So yeah, no, it was pretty cool. Everyone behind the scenes was absolutely amazing. I think from day one, I got on well with all the staff. As I said, I was a bigger fan than I was a fighter, so I took every opportunity to meet more fighters, to meet the staff, to get to know everyone, including Dana White and all that. And yeah, it's pretty much that memory has always stuck with me. I've got some, again, more stories I can tell you about some of the interesting stuff that happened on how I got to know a lot of the guys in the event.
Yeah. I was actually got to touch on, but you've beat me to it. I was going to ask about Tito Ortiz. He's one of my favourites. As Ben said, we're both UFC nuffies and super MMA fans. Obviously, you said he was a very nice guy backstage. Was there any kind of trash talk or banter? It maybe not with him or any of the other fighters that you come across that you can maybe share with us and some of our fans that are listening?
Yeah, look, as I said, it's one of the things I realized very early on with Tito is that a lot of the fighters have a stage personality and a back scene personality. Like Tito, I realized his personality was the heel. It's that old saying in media, it doesn't matter whether they say good things, doesn't matter whether they say bad things, all that matters is that they're talking about you. And that's one of the things that Tito really understood, and he kind of started that idea. And I think, guys like Conor McGregor and Michael Bisping really took that. And I think Bisping is one of the better examples where he was a real heel in the UFC until he became famous, and then he switched to his more likable personality. And that's more like what he was behind the scenes. But these guys would do a lot of trash talk in front of the camera because they knew how important it was about selling fights. If you don't have a name, you have to be able to sell the fights. For me, I just felt I just wanted to be myself. I wanted to be authentic from day one. I think one of my original tags that I used was the world's toughest nerd. Because I was an IT guy. Worked with computers. I was considered a nerd growing up, even though I did combat sports and this sort of stuff. And interestingly enough, when they ended up shooting the first video game, building the first video game, they did camera shoots, and I was actually on the very first video game. And because I had a lot of the developers come up and talk to me, because I would go to their shootings to photograph me so they could create my character for the video game. They go, "Man, we love you, an IT guy in the UFC kicking ass." And they ended up putting my character in. So I was in the original instruction manual as one of the main characters. So you have your main characters, and then you have, all the other characters are in there. So I was listed in the original manual, and then they actually gave me a really powerful secret combination move, which would, take people's power. If you pulled up, it was a spinning back kick that would drop people's energy levels, right down. It kind of paid off in that regard. So yeah, no, it was pretty cool. As I said, to reiterate what the original question was, trash talk was part of it, and a lot of my opponents used it, but I realized it was more about selling fights, and that most of the time behind the scenes, the guys were actually pretty good-natured and, just normal, everyday guys. Saying that, there were some guys who were definitely thugs and brutish and that side of it. I think that's one of the reasons the UFC leveraged me so much. So every time I got brought over, they used me to promote their events, to send to radio, TV, newspaper interviews, because they knew I understood the sport, I understood what was going on. We were in an era where they were trying to ban the sport because it was too brutal. So the original tagline was 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. It was sold as human cockfighting. Zuffa took over. They wanted to change that perception into a legitimate international sport. So they were fighting the old marketing that had been previously in place to get people to watch, which drew in the original crowds. But then they wanted to swing it into more of a sporting event, which, as we've seen, they've managed to achieve with their worldwide exposure. And I just remember a few times where I would go to these interviews, and I remember specifically one in it was London. So it was the first time they were ever fighting in London. So I got a lot of firsts as well. I fought in the first ever event in London, first ever event in Manchester. And in London, it was in the Royal Albert Hall, which I believe never happened again. So that was a historic place that we got to fight in, and just an amazing experience. But I remember talking to the press there. They're trying to get us to sound like thugs and barbarians. And every time they would ask a question, I would interject and go, "No, it's a sport. We're sanctioned by the New Jersey Athletic Commission. We have rules. There are things we can and can't do. It's not violence. It's a sporting thing where the goal is to overcome your opponent. It's not about injuring them." It got to the point where they were asking a question, and they go, "Hey guys, blah blah this question, and can we let someone else answer other than Elvis first?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay."
You touched on it there, like we're obviously this new generation, and Dana White obviously being such a prolific figure. Tell us a little bit about your run-ins with Dana White. What do you think of him as a bloke? Do you think he's great for the sport? And have you got any funny or interesting stories that people might not know about Dana that you could share with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think we wouldn't be where we are today without Dana. I think he's a very brash and outspoken person. But he has a goal, and the way he does it is channeled towards ensuring the success of the sport. And again, I think it's very similar to what Tito and Connor and Michael and all those guys. You have a certain personality that you push forward on the public because he wants to be tough, he wants to be firm. He knows what he needs to do to get there, and it can at times seem abrasive, but it works. And I remember the first time I really kind of got to know Dana is, so I'll go all the way back to UFC 30. So back then, he actually had family members working in the back office. That's where I met Joe Silva. I remember meeting the head photographer. I ended up getting on with him really well because I was a photographer at the time, talking camera stuff. And I'm here in New Jersey. Instead of going around looking at the place, I literally just sat a lot of the time in the admin office because I knew if I sat there, fighters would come in. I would get to meet all these fighters, and that's how I got to meet a lot of the staff, got to know them well. And I'd be sitting in the office, hanging out, chatting to the staff, chatting to the fighters as they were coming in. And it's one time I'm sitting in the office and everyone's gone. I'm sitting there by myself. And this phone rings. Ring, 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 until it rings out. 30 seconds later, it starts ringing again. I'm like, oh, okay. Obviously, it's important. And so I've gone, what the hell? Picked up the phone and go, hi, UFC office, Zupa, New Jersey, how can we help? And he goes, hi, my name's so-and-so. I don't even remember who it was. I want to speak to Joe Silva. And I said, look, nobody's in the office at the moment. Give me your contact details. I go, I can't guarantee they will call you back, but I can promise you they will get your message. He goes, yeah, no problem. So I'm on the phone, I'm writing this down, and while I'm on the phone doing this, Dana walks into the room, and then he just stops at the doorway, sees me on the phone, puts his hands on his hips, and he's just looking at me. And I'm like, look, thank you very much. As I said, I'll ensure that this message gets to where you want it to. Hopefully you get the call back. UFC is the best sport in the world. Have a great day. And hung up. And Dana goes, what the hell are you doing? And I'm like, Dana. He goes, we're a family. I go, I'm here to make sure we succeed. I go, I'm going to succeed in the cage, but if you need help here, I'm always going to put the effort in to help. He goes, you don't need to do that. And I go, I don't need to, I want to. And I think he's always remembered that, and even to today, he always, anytime he mentions pioneers of the sport, he brings me up. I've got clips, even just recently, he mentions, Australia, the very first Australian, Elvis Sinosic, remembers my name, forgets a lot of the other people names, but it's always stuck with him. Now, all I need him to do from here is get me into the Pioneers wing of the UFC Hall of Fame. Come on, come on, Dana. Pioneer wing of the UFC Hall of Fame. I think I've earned it. Yeah. I put the work in now. Now's time to get the recognition.
I think we could do that for you, Elvis. Hopefully this pod will blow up and we'll tag Dana, and hopefully the big fella will give you just desserts because, mate, you have been a pioneer, and, guys like Volk and, Whitaker, you paved the way for them. So, yeah, it's a credible journey, and we're absolutely pumped that you're here with us.
And Elvis, obviously, that's a cool story about Dana. A few other vets of the UFC from around your time are still going around. You've got Big Joe Rogan. We've got Bruce Buffer. Do you have a good relationship with those guys? Do you think they're still of really high value to the sport? And I guess any other little cool stories about, let's say, those two in particular?
Well, yeah, look, so UFC 33, I actually ended up being the first Australian to commentate a UFC event. So, I went in there. I got unlucky because it was probably the worst event in UFC history. Every single match went the distance. During that event, the main event got cut off at the end, so the pay-per-view didn't actually get to see the result of the match. Oh, no. And obviously it was my first time commentating, so it was difficult. There were no real moments where you can go, yeah, get excited, get that emotion into, like, we're trying to be excited about what's going on. And so I think that hampered my future events of opportunities of getting into the commentary booth. But yeah, back then I met a lot of great guys: Mike Goldberg, Bruce Buffer, Joe Rogan. So Joe Rogan is a Jean-Jacques Machado black belt. He obviously trained also under Eddie Bravo. I'd met Eddie Bravo, who's also Jean-Jacques Machado black belt. I was at the time an RCJ Machado, which is the umbrella organization student. At that point, I wasn't a black belt, but I was under there. I'm under Carlos Machado. Those guys are some of the pioneers of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu globally, some of the best guys. So obviously I had that connection with them. I got to know Joe. Every time I'd go to the UFC in the US, Joe would usually have a comedy show the night before the event. And if I was there not fighting, obviously fighting, I would be in bed. But if I was not fighting, he would give me free tickets to the show. I got to go back room with Joe and Eddie and those guys after the show. Absolutely great guy. I think Joe is one of the reasons the sport is so successful, because he's just so passionate. He's also knowledgeable about the sport. Which brings up another thing, which is a cool moment. I commentated an event called Impact FC here in Australia, where they brought in. It was sadly a one and done event. I think they had two events, one in Brisbane, one in Sydney. They recorded some of the Brisbane stuff, but then they actually screened it on the Sydney pay-per-view in between other fights. And I was commentating on that fight, and Paulo Filho, one of the BTT black belts, was using a move called deep half guard, which a lot of people weren't familiar with. And obviously, at that point, I was a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I knew what deep half guard, and I was quite impressed that he was using it in MMA, and I understood what his goal was. So I was explaining what was going on and predicting what he was going to do. And after the event, Joe actually goes, Elvis was some of the best commentary I heard. He really understood and was able to explain what was going on in the matches, and I really enjoyed it. So, cool little side story I just thought I'd throw in there. No. But anyway, I met Bruce Buffer there. Got to know him. He's a great guy. Again, he's the voice of the UFC. It's going to be sad once he walks away, because, when we hear that call, it's time, and his call outs and everything. He really loves the sport. He's really did it. You can see how he interacts with the fighters when he's doing the call outs. He really does his best to give them the opportunity to get their exposure with his calls. He's been really good. My wife probably won't like this, but my first wedding, he actually did the Bruce Buffer walk-in intro for me walking into our function afterwards. Yeah, so she actually contacted him and did the intro. So when I didn't even know it was going to happen until it happened. So he did this intro. and I think that probably launched his career, where he does those things for people's voicemails and birthday messages and that. So he did my wedding intro into the after function after the wedding, which was pretty cool. Everyone was kind of, oh, wow.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool. And he recently did another intro for me for my Senate plebiscite with the Libertarian Party. I see him at every event. You know, he'll always come over, say hello, and we get our obligatory fan photo with him. No, he's an absolutely great guy. He's genuine, really nice. You know, Mike Goldberg, as I mentioned, was I did the commentary the first time with him. I know I think it was around when Zuffa stopped, he left as well. But he was great. He was very passionate. He did the behind the scenes work really well. He's a great commentator, great person. He gave me an exclusive interview when I was on Fox Sports with UFC Fight Week here in Australia, which was really cool of him. I really can't speak bad about anyone behind the scenes. Everyone there has always been super nice to me. They've always been very friendly and receptive. So, I absolutely only have good things to say. And as I said, like, I've known Dana since he had hair, and he's kind of like, he's become a real life action figure for the UFC, and as I said, without Dana we wouldn't be where we are, without Joe we wouldn't be where we are, without Bruce we wouldn't be where. All of those individuals put their personality into the UFC, and it's really helped to build where we are today. I mean, Joe's podcast, probably for a long time most listened to podcasts in the world. He talks about a lot of different things, but he never forgets about the UFC, and I think that's really great.
Yeah,
absolutely. And Elvis, look, I know we're going really over time here from what we planned originally, but if you don't mind, just a couple more quick.
I did warn you that I can talk a lot.
No, but the stories have been awesome, mate. But look, we can't wrap up without obviously touching on the state of Australian MMA at the moment, and I'd just love to get your perspective on where the Australian contingent of UFC fighters is. First of all, at the moment, we've had champions, we've had Robert Whittaker, we've had Volkanovski, we've had Jack Della, we've had Steve said contend for a championship. We've got amazing plethora of great fighters. We've had Tai Tuivasa, Jake Matthews, Jimmy Crute. Got a really good crop of fighters at the moment. You must be proud looking at the state of Australian MMA at the moment. And I guess, can you just give us an insight into what it's like, for people who are not on the UFC roster at the moment? Is the future looking bright for Australian MMA? And do you think we'll have a really strong presence within the UFC for years to come?
Look, I have no doubt. I look, pound for pound, per capita success. We're probably the strongest country in the world. Like, we don't have the population a lot of other countries do. Our whole country is probably the population of some of the largest cities around the world. And to have so many champions come out of this country, we're a nation of battlers. We love our sport. We're the sort of country that will get behind our athletes. I was at the last UFC in Sydney where Volk was contending against Lopez, and the walkout was amazing. Playing from the land down under, people singing, everyone singing and cheering, and Volk dancing to it. I got a videoed it, obviously, and it was what was really funny is I'm panning around, and when Volk goes into the cage, and you see Joe Lopez just kind of bopping along to the tune as well. The whole place is going off. I don't think anywhere in the world really captures the sort of spirit that we have here in Australia. The way we love our athletes, the way we love our sport. I know there are a lot of great countries out there, but there's nothing like what I've seen or felt. I've watched UFC. I've watched events in Japan and in the UK and in Canada. I've been around the world at different events, and there's something special about, watching. And I've got to say, Sydney is the best state. I mean, they're all great, but, Sydney really, really welcomes our guys. As you guys have touched on, we have had so many, not just champions, but title contenders in the men's and women's division. We've got great training available here in Australia. We've got, our jiu-jitsu is some of the best in the world. We've got some great guys competing internationally. We've got some guys going to compete very shortly in the UFC BJJ event as well. So the skill level is here. Our wrestling is coming up, because I think that was our biggest hurdle. We've always had amazing kickboxers, Thai boxers. You look at someone like John Wayne Parr and everyone else that's kind of part of our kickboxing culture. It's very strong. We've always had great stand-up. Being very close to Thailand probably helps a lot. Thanks to John Will, our jiu-jitsu is well and truly established in this country. We have some great competitors in both gi and no gi, with world champions, guys like Levi Jones and others. And as I said, the wrestling now has really caught up, specifically with MMA-focused wrestling, because obviously MMA wrestling is a little bit different. It's one of the things we, focus a lot on. It's why you need a cage, a padded wall. The cage and the wall change a lot of things about how we apply our wrestling. There's a lot of things you've got to adjust, and we've really adapted that wrestling. So that's why we have so many great athletes currently in the UFC, and I have no doubt we will have many more great athletes. I mean, at this stage, Volk is probably considered by many the greatest featherweight of all time. I think with his recent title defense, he's really cemented himself in that position. And the thing about Volk is he's not going to stop here. He's got the reason, Volk's not going to stop, because he was fighting when he probably shouldn't. He was jumping into events on short notice. He was taking fights too close after injuries or that knockout. He probably should have taken longer off. But he has that hunger in him that you can't teach, and that's probably the hardest thing to find in an athlete. But I think it's the one thing we find in more athletes in Australia is that hunger, that desire, that will to never give up. And I think that's one of the things I've always taken with me in the ring. I never, or the cage, I never went in just to get through. I always went in with the goal of winning decisively, ending the bout. May not have gone that way, but my goal was never to survive. My goal was always to be victorious. I'm either going to walk out with my shield or on my shield, and most Australians are exactly like that. You look at the losses of Rob and Alex. They lost because they were pushing forward, they were engaging, they were looking to win decisively. And when you put yourself in that position, you take risks, and sometimes you get caught. But even after that happens, we dust ourselves off, we get back up, and we get back in as soon as I can. And that's why I feel very confident about Australia's MMA future.
Awesome. Elvis, just a couple of quick ones for you. It's quite topical at the moment. Obviously, you touched on, I was going to touch on weight cutting, but considering you're putting weights in your socks and undies and everywhere else, I'm not sure what your answer is going to be here, but I'd love to know, we've seen a couple of fighters recently actually pass out after weight cuts and, talk about how hard it is. And I'd love to just get your perspective quickly, maybe a couple of little cheeky tactics you might have done, like the weight thing. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Look, obviously, for myself, I pretty much mostly walked into the cage around my walk-around weight. I'd be walking around off season, around, 215, which is I think around 95 kilos. I was fighting at 93 or 92 point, whatever it was. So just through hard training, most of the time I would get there. I think the heaviest I ever got was about 98, 99 kilos. So, at most during the week, I'd have to fight week, maybe cut a kilo or two in the sauna. Which brings up a couple of the other funny stories. Because I was never doing that, I remember one time on weigh-in day, I'm in the breakfast area. It's a buffet breakfast. I've got this plate of bacon and eggs, and I'm eating bacon and eggs, and I have all these fighters sitting there sipping water, giving me the dirty while I'm eating all this food. Saying that, even though I never really had to cut, I've obviously looked into it, learned how to do it, because I've had a lot of fighters that need to cut. I think it is one of the conundrums of the sport. As much as I would like my guys to fight at their walk-around rate, the reality is it's going to be at a disadvantage if no one else is doing it. Yeah. So, there are responsible ways. We have a water cutting program. It's basically using water loading, salt restriction, increasing salt. So it's become a very scientific process. It's also something you have to train your body to do. The biggest mistake I see is amateurs trying to cut too much too soon. You're better off in your early parts of your career limiting how much you cut, practicing the cuts, letting your body get used to it, because the more you weight cut, the easier it gets. As your body becomes used to shedding that water weight, the more you do it, the more you're able to do it. Again, it's that conundrum of ensuring you're not pushing yourself too hard to get too much of an advantage, because as you said, we've seen people pass out. We've seen poor performances as a result of excessive cutting. One of the good things is they did extend the weigh-in time. It's not quite 48 hours. I think it's something like 36 hours before the fight. So at least it's giving guys some opportunity to get rehydrated. The reality is rehydration, it probably takes 48 hours to recover from where you were before you started your weight cut, because you've got to consider the whole week you're restricting fluids and food and all that sort of stuff. So it is a difficult situation. There is always going to be people that take advantage of it. The problem is, if you extend the weigh into 48 hours, that means people are going to cut even more weight because they know they've got even more time. So it's kind of hard to find that balance. I know one have a walk-in weight. They do a hydration test, but I've also heard that fighters have learned how to game the system, how to fool the hydrations, and then that's always going to be the problem. No matter what solution you come with, there's always going to be someone who wants to get the advantage and find a way to have one up on their opponent. So I'm not sure what the solution is. From my perspective, it's just about being the smartest about how you're doing it, making sure you're being very scientific, giving your fighter the best opportunity to cut the most weight that gives them the best chance to be competitive without putting their performance at risk by overcutting. Not all coaches, well, I think most coaches want that. The problem is most fighters don't understand that, and to them sometimes cutting more is better than coming in at a better weight. We saw with Rob Whittaker when he was fighting at welterweight, not so great. As soon as he reduced how much he was cutting and started fighting at middleweight, his performance went through the roof. And I don't think it's because suddenly his skills got noticeably, obviously he's getting better, but I don't think the jump was his skill, but his ability to apply them in a much healthier state. So I think it's more about finding the balance between weight cutting and performance.
Have you seen any, just obviously you're very practical and do it all above board, but have you seen any like little cheeky things or extreme tactics that you can kind of give a bit of an insight to our listeners? I've heard some really crazy stuff like, wrapping up. Have you got any little extreme ones you've seen?
Look, everyone does it. So putting on sauna suits to cover yourself up the sweat, going into the sauna. Trust me, we've tried it all. Sauna suits, a heated room with blankets, hot baths, using a credit card to scrape off the sweat to make yourself sweat more.
Wow.
There's these products you can put on your skin to increase how much you sweat. Look, everyone's doing that. None of that is crazy. What's crazy is how much you're willing to do it to achieve the result. So like I've had guys that have come in overweight, and we've had to really push it to make weight. We're, I think, one time fighting up in Queensland where there was no sauna, so we had to stick a sauna suit on we had to stick him in a really hot bath for ages, get him sweating hard, put a sauna suit, go in the car park, jog around until the extra kilos come off. So the extreme stuff happens when you don't prepare properly. You don't meet your goals before you get to the weigh-in day. As I said, there are a lot of different things that people are doing. And the reality is, it just comes down to how well have you prepared.
Yeah, fair enough.
Absolutely.
And just sorry, Ben. I'll just quickly, I know we're going a bit over the time, but I just also wanted, it's very topical at the moment, fighters pay. The UFC signed this $1 billion deal with Paramount. I know back in the day you probably were fighting for hundreds of dollars, not hundreds of millions, but I'd just love to know from you, someone who's been there and done that. What's your thoughts on fighter pay? Do you think they're getting looked after? Do you think it's unfair? What do you think?
Oh, look, compared to what I was getting, they're more than getting looked after. Like, the money that is definitely there. Could they get more money? I have no doubt. I think it's a catch-22 because people try and compare it to like sports like boxing when you see some of the purses that they get there. But then when you look at those events and the undercard fighters are getting pittance anyway, just because the main event. I think one of the things that I do appreciate about the UFC is it is a far more even structure through the lower levels. The minimum pay is when people are complaining about the UFC. I think when I went in, it was $5,000, and like that was back then. And I've seen, 15 years after I've gone in there with that sort of amount, people still getting $500 in undercards. So I know people complain that, look how much money they put in. But something I like to point out is people need to realize that how much they sunk into the sport and lost before it got to where it was making money. So it's a balancing act. You've got to consider how much they're putting in, how much they're getting out, what they're putting back into not just the fighters, but promotion, the sport, building the names. They're now getting pay-per-view cuts. So, we know the champions are getting millions. Maybe they're not the same millions that some of the boxing big names are getting. But I would rather see what the UFC is doing, where it flows more down to the undercard rather than flow up like it does. So with boxing, it all flows to the top. At least in the UFC, maybe they're not flowing as much of it to the fighters, but it's more evenly distributed. And that's where that balancing act. Do I think they could get more? I'm sure they could. I'm sure that the organization could probably adjust some of the books and do a few things and get them more money for the fighters. But I also appreciate the fact that they look after a lot of the fighters. And I will say that now, this is one of those things that I know that happens, and it's not an excuse to justify lower pay, but Dana does reward fighters with backroom bonuses. So if you go out and you perform, you put on a show, you put yourself on the line, you'll get rewarded. Like, it's not going to be millions, maybe 20,000, 50,000. Now they have the official, performance bonuses, but he also goes out and gives other bonuses on top of that. So, they do appreciate what the fighters go in. A lot of people think that they probably don't, but I think, if the organisation doesn't, Dana definitely does. I've seen it happen. I've been on the receiving end. I fought Bisping, and I probably had one of the worst lead-ins. I almost had to pull out because of injury. Terrible trip there. I put in, performance. I took it to him, almost won, didn't win. I got my show, purse. I got the fight of the night, I think, as well, and then Dana gave me another bonus on top of that as well because he appreciated what I did. So, look, it's, as I said, I think their structure is still better than a lot of other places. They look after the lower guys better than most other organizations. The fighters are definitely the champions are definitely getting looked after. Could everyone get a lot more? Sure. And hopefully it will. And I think we are seeing that. I think minimum purses have gone up. Back in my day, as I said, it was 5,000. I think it's something like 15 or 17,000. I'm not in the sport now, but I remember around, I think 2010, it was around 15,000 or something like that. And I'm sure now it's probably something like 20,000. So, at least the hardest thing is those guys trying to build a name, because you've got to either choose not to work or balance your work with your training, and it can be very difficult. So at least if they're getting more, I'd rather see that than the guys at the top end getting more. So yeah, could they be better? Yes. Do they have it better than others? Yes.
100%, Elvis. Well, look, I think we better come to a close shortly. Elvis, you have been more than generous with your time. I did just quickly want to say, because we touched on it at the start, you're venturing into politics at the moment. You've got a lot going on with the gym. You're clearly still very heavily invested within the Australian MMA space. I know you've done some media work over the past, as you touched on earlier in the chat. What are we going to see from Elvis Sinosic in the next, let's say, 10 years?
Well, I'll start with this. Obviously, I've got a lot more to say, so maybe we can do a follow-up interview down the track in a couple of podcasts. When you're struggling to find someone to jump on, I'm always happy to get back on, and we can continue the story from there. Planning to run at the next state election coming up in 2028. I'm part of the Libertarian Party Federal Executive, so if you're looking for a party that looks out for Australians, consider looking into the Libertarian Party, because I think they have their values in the right place. So yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay involved in the sport. I think Australia needs to be put back on track, so I'll be staying involved in politics until we get things back on track and Australia looking after Australians.
Amazing, Elvis. Amazing. Well, look, as I touched on, you've spent much more time with us than we originally planned. We are so appreciative of your time. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Australia's pioneer of UFC, Australia's first ever UFC competitor, first ever title challenger, and just a great bloke from your time chatting today. Happy 21st birthday, Elvis. And yeah, we'd love you to be a friend of our show, and we'd love to get you on again down the track. But mate, thanks so much for your time on this Friday afternoon.
No problem. I won't throw any shade at you guys. Make sure you tune in. In future, check out Throwing Shade podcast. I'm sure they're going to get a lot of good guys. I appreciate you guys getting me on and allowing me to waffle on about my history. And as I always like to finish my interviews, it's good to be the king.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. What a great interview from Elvis Sinosic. Thank you so much, Elvis, for giving us your time. It was so insightful. And for two fighting nerds, we absolutely loved it. Thanks all our fans. Obviously, like Tucker said, we're killing it. We got 20,000, views on YouTube. We're up to almost 40,000 on Instagram. We've got over 200 followers on Instagram, and now we're about 135 subscribers to YouTube. So thank you so much for all your support. Please keep telling your friends, sharing it wherever you can. We want to make this the best UFC, MMA, combat sport podcast. And Tuckers, thanks so much for your time and organising the guest. Couldn't have done it without you, brother. And make sure you follow us at all our social media handles, at the Throwing Shade Pod on Instagram, at the Throwing Shade Pod on YouTube, and at the Throwing Shade Pod on Spotify. Give us a listen, and thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers. Good?
Not that throwing shade pot, but